My name is Violet. I'm 34, living in Colorado Springs, and for years, I've carried a painful truth. The very people I called family deceived me and stole the only thing my grandfather left for me. A nearly 5-acre piece of land nestled at the foot of Cheyenne Mountain. I remember that evening vividly. A weekend dinner at our old wooden house where our family used to gather. My mother, Eleanor, had a stack of documents laid out on the oak table, right next to a steaming pot roast. "It's just some administrative paperwork, sweetheart," she said with a soft smile, though her eyes never left me. My father, David, sat across the table, one hand resting on the wood, slightly trembling. His voice, however, was unnervingly firm. "You know how complex land management, taxes, and contracts can be. You're busy with your work at the library. Best to let someone experienced handle it." I glanced to my left. There was Ryan, my younger brother, the golden child, always praised for his business instincts. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, that half smirk on his face. "You just need to sign, sis. I'll handle the rest. It's still family land after all." I looked down at the packet, skimming the pages. Land transfer agreement was printed in bold at the top. I frowned. Why transfer it to Ryan? Grandpa left that land to me. It's clearly stated in his will. "You don't understand," my mother cut in. "It's just temporary, to make tax filing and permitting easier. Whose name it's under doesn't matter. We're family." My heart pounded. Something didn't feel right. But I was too used to being labeled as emotional, unrealistic, or out of touch. For years, from choosing schools to starting a community mini-liggery, I had always been the daughter who dreamed too much. Ryan tapped his fingers on the table. "Remember that graphic novel shop idea you had? Mom and Dad had to bail you out. We're just trying to avoid that kind of mistake again." I swallowed hard. Part of me wanted to scream, but the other part, the one taught to stay quiet, to obey, picked up the pen. I signed. Ryan immediately scooped up the documents like a bank teller finalizing a deal. "Great. I'll get started on the barn project and have someone cultivate the west field. We'll finally make that land productive." Not long after, red flags started popping up. Every time I asked about the construction, they brushed me off. I stopped receiving invitations to visit the property. Too busy. In talks with investors. Potential partnership. They spoke like I was no longer involved. My calls went unanswered. My texts received cold, clipped replies. When I asked to see the blueprints, my mother snapped. "Don't worry about things you don't understand, you're too sensitive." Eventually, I drove out there myself, only to find a new padlock on the gate. A sign on the fence read, "Private property, no trespassing." The land my grandfather left me, legally, was now in my brother's name. I stood on the dusty road, fists clenched. I was no longer the girl who crumbled at being called a burden. I no longer clung to the fantasy that family is forever. This wasn't about simplifying paperwork. This had been planned. Carefully. Intentionally. And I was the easiest piece to manipulate on their board. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply made a vow. Right then, beneath the long shadows of sunset on the dry grass, that I would take back everything. Not just the land, but the truth. My dignity. And my right to decide what my life would become. I didn't uncover the truth through some dramatic argument or tearful confession. It came from a casual phone call with Avery, an old classmate who now works at the El Paso County Land Records Office. She mentioned seeing my name listed on documents tied to a bank loan involving land. "Violet, did you know your land has been mortgaged?" I froze. 3 days later, I had the loan agreement in hand. Signed just 8 days after that dinner when I was pressured to transfer the property. The borrower listed was Ryan. And the land my grandfather left me? It was now collateral for a loan of nearly $600,000. supposedly to fund a smart farm initiative. Except, that farm never existed. I didn't confront them, I didn't cause a scene, I went to see Tiffany Quinn instead. A sharp, young estate and land use attorney I'd heard speak at a community seminar. There was something steady about her, something that made people trust her. I laid out everything. The promise that it's still family land, the manipulation, and now, the massive loan hanging behind my back. Tiffany spent nearly 3 hours reviewing the documents. When she finally looked up, her eyes were gleaming, like she'd just spotted a legal gem. "They moved too fast," she said. "And that's where they messed up. According to a clause in the original agreement, yes, the one my mother brushed off as tax simplification, the transfer of ownership was only valid if the property wasn't used for any commercial loan purpose within 24 months. Any violation of that clause would nullify the transfer and revert ownership back to the original holder, in this case, me. Ryan hadn't just violated the clause, he dragged both of my parents into it as co-signers. For 7 years I stayed silent. I tracked every transaction, every asset shift, every time Ryan expanded his so-called ventures. I archived every contract, every email sent to banks, every misleading financial statement. I learned to read market charts. I studied banking law. I attended Tiffany's weekend legal clinics without missing a single one. I wasn't the girl who used to sit quietly at the dinner table anymore, biting her lip in silence. I became the record keeper, the watcher, the one who collected truth like currency. When the market started to collapse, I knew the moment had come. The smart farm fell apart, loans came due, the bank issued a foreclosure notice. Ryan, so used to being rescued, scrambled to refinance. They mortgaged my parents' house on the west end of town. Then the second condo in Denver. All 3 properties ended up blacklisted within 5 months. Still, I said nothing. But I wasn't idle. With Tiffany's help, I quietly founded Clear Ridge Ventures, LLC, an environmental company created with the mission of developing community ecospaces. When the land went to private auction following foreclosure, my company bought it for $385,000, 35% below its original appraised value. No one knew I was behind the purchase. Not Ryan, not my parents, no one. Until the day I stood on that land again. Ownership, under a new name, building permits in hand, and a city-approved plan for an outdoor wellness center ready to launch. That day, the wind was strong, dry leaves skated across the dirt. My grandfather's old house stood in splinters, more skeleton than shelter. But in my mind, a new foundation had already been laid. I looked out toward the sunlit ridge. The words that once stung like blades, "You're too fragile. Don't take risks. Ryan understands finance better than you." They no longer haunted me. I had turned them into fuel. And while they were still busy trying to patch the holes in their crumbling world, I sat quietly in my office at Clear Ridge Ventures, beside Tiffany, finalizing our construction documents. They had no idea what was coming, but they would, very soon. I was reviewing the final blueprint for the retreat center when a sharp knock interrupted my thoughts. 3 quick raps, then silence. It was 8:42 p.m. I opened the door. And there they were. A sight that made me grip the doorframe to steady myself. My father, David, wearing a frayed old jacket. My mother, Eleanor, with smudged makeup under her eyes. And Ryan, pale and hollow-eyed, his hair unkempt like he'd stepped straight out of a nightmare. "We need somewhere to stay," Ryan rasped. No greeting, no apology. Just a declaration. As if I were obligated to say yes. I let them in. My apartment, tucked in the heart of the city, was neat and quiet. Everything their appearance was not. My father collapsed into a wooden chair by the kitchen table. My mother, out of habit, dropped onto the leather couch. Her eyes scanning the room for something, anything, familiar. "Violet, you know how bad things are," my mother began, trying to steady her voice. The house was repossessed last week. They showed up while I was cooking dinner, no warning. I didn't respond. I had read the foreclosure notice 3 weeks ago. We just need a few months, Ryan cut in. You still have that old cabin on the land. I know it's still there. I just need a place to regroup. Just a few months, that's all. I got up, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled out a blue folder I had prepared long ago. I laid it flat on the table and opened it. I no longer own that cabin, I said, each word measured. Clear Ridge Ventures owns the entire property, including the auxiliary house. And you, I looked at each of them, have no legal claim to any of it. My father slammed his palm on the table. That's nonsense. That land belonged to your grandfather. It's family land. It was, I said firmly. Until you used it to back a loan without informing me. That act triggered the nullification clause in the transfer agreement. You're punishing us? My mother whispered, her eyes trembling. You can't treat your family this way. I turned the page. Do you remember the $600,000 loan from Western Federal Bank? This is a copy of it. And here's an email from the bank confirming that you used the land as collateral without my consent. That voided the original transfer. Legally, the property returned to my name at that point. Ryan snatched the document, scanned it, then dropped it. This can't be legal. Then get a lawyer, I said coldly. I'll wait. No one spoke for several seconds. I closed the folder and pushed it across the table toward them. I've prepaid for 3 nights at the Silver Rock Motel. The room numbers are listed. In this envelope you'll find a list of apartments in the area, under $900, and information about the local job placement center. I've even highlighted roles that match your current skill sets. We're not charity cases, my father growled, his face flushed with anger. No, I nodded. You're just people who need to learn how to stand on your own. Like I did. My mother stood, holding the envelope without opening it. She looked at me, a mixture of pain and disbelief in her eyes. How long have you been planning this? I met her gaze. 7 years. Every step, every document, every time you assumed I'd never have the strength to say no. Ryan scoffed with a bitter laugh. So much for being noble. Turns out, all you needed was money to finally get revenge. I walked to the door. This isn't revenge, it's accountability. As they rose and made their way out, I held the door open. My mother paused at the threshold, her eyes misting. We're family, Violet. No, I said quietly. We're people who once lived under the same roof. Real family doesn't use trust as leverage. The door closed behind them. I stood still for a moment. Not happy. Not angry. Just hollow. But I knew the emptiness wouldn't last. Because after the silence, I would move forward. No longer chained to what once masqueraded as love. At sunrise, the construction crew arrived at the foot of the hill. Land that once belonged to my grandfather. Land that had cradled my bruised childhood. Thin fog blanketed the ground, and the old wooden house stood like a ghost, gray, slanted, and stuffed with memories I no longer wished to keep. Mrs. Violet? I turned. Ethan Hale, the site supervisor, walked up with the blueprints in hand. He was around 40, his eyes calm, yet assertive. His jacket bore the logo of Hale Works Construction, the firm Tiffany had recommended. From our first meeting, I sensed the quiet respect in the way he listened. Never interrupting, never dismissing. We're ready to start, he said. Still want the whole thing torn down? I nodded without hesitation. All of it, including the foundation. I want to start from zero, literally. He nodded back. Understood. I just had to confirm because. The roar of a car engine cut him off. I turned toward the sound. An old SUV barreled through the temporary gate and skidded to a stop on the dirt road. 3 figures stepped out. My parents and Ryan. I sighed. Not surprised. Violet! My mother cried, rushing toward me. You can't destroy the house. I didn't move. Ethan looked to me for a signal. I gave a slight nod. He motioned for the crew to halt the machines. This is a restricted construction site, I said calmly. You're not allowed here. You're tearing down a part of our family's history? My father shouted, voice shaking with rage. That house was where I got labeled a failure at 12, I interrupted. Where Mom called me a burden, where Ryan burned my first design sketch in the fireplace because it was useless. If that's your idea of family memories, I'm tearing it down brick by brick. Ryan stepped forward, disdain in his voice. This is childish. You're building some fantasy to pretend you won. I didn't answer. I pulled a leather folder from my bag and handed my mother a document. The court-issued cease and desist order, barring them from the site. This is your copy. If you come here again without legal grounds, I'll call the police. And they won't treat it as a family dispute. This is a permitted construction site. You'd really use the law against your own parents? My father snapped. Face flushed. It's not about what I'd do, I said. It's about what I have to do. Because if I don't, I'll fall back into that old cycle, always needing permission to be myself. Ethan stepped closer, professional but firm. I'm going to have to ask you all to leave the site. Safety and legal reasons. Ryan started to object, but Ethan had already signaled 2 security guards posted by the gate. No threats were necessary. Just that look. And the fact that I wasn't afraid anymore. I'll remember this, Violet, my mother said, tears blurring her eyes. One day you'll regret it. I met her gaze. I already did. For 27 years. For trusting people who should have protected me. Not anymore. As they turned and walked away, I nodded to Ethan. Start the machines. The roar of engines shattered the heavy silence. The excavator's arm lowered slowly, digging into the rotted shingles of the roof. The crack of splitting timber echoed. Like the sound of a past I no longer had to preserve. Ethan stood beside me, watching the house crumble. How does it feel? Free, I said quietly. And right. He nodded. You chose to begin again. Not many people have the courage to do that. I looked out over the clearing, where soon there would be a meditation garden, a nature therapy zone, and community workshop rooms. Everything I had once dreamed of. Not to prove anything to anyone, but because I finally knew I deserved a life that wasn't dictated by someone else's approval. In my hand was the blueprint, titled, The Ridgewell Center, a place to return to yourself. No more manipulation, no more doubt, no more voices telling me I wasn't enough. Only me, my land, and the future I would build with my own hands. Sabrina's text came through, just as I was mid-meeting with the interior design team for the meditation hall. Just 3 words. Turn on the news. I opened my laptop and pulled up the local KCR7 live stream. There he was. Ryan. Standing outside the construction site's gate. Behind him, a chain-link fence and a bold sign. Construction zone. No unauthorized entry. He's destroying a legacy, Ryan declared to the camera, face flushed with righteous anger. That house was a symbol of our family, of this town. And my sister, the one who grew up there, is tearing it all down to build some vague wellness center. The reporter nodded. So, you're saying Violet Harrow is acting emotionally? Exactly, Ryan snapped. She doesn't respect tradition, doesn't care about family history, and clearly doesn't understand real business. I sat quietly. I'd heard those words before, dozens of times if not more. But this time, they were being broadcast on live television. And this time, I wasn't going to stay silent. 2 hours later, I was seated live on Talk of the Springs, across from veteran host Jade Monroe. I wore a deep jade blazer, hair pulled into a neat bun, makeup light but purposeful. Not to impress, to take control of the narrative. Violet, Jade began. Your brother claims you're destroying family history to serve a personal agenda. What's your response? I smiled calmly. I'm not destroying anything. I'm rebuilding. On a foundation that no longer accommodates manipulation, deception, or the exploitation of other people's assets. What do you mean by that? I pulled a slim envelope from my bag and handed it to her. Inside were copies of documents Tiffany had gathered. An illegal loan agreement using my land as collateral, emails between Ryan and so-called investors, and class action complaints from 3 elderly victims. All lured in by Ryan's promises and left broke when the market crashed. Ryan didn't just use my land without consent, I said. He used it to build credibility, to solicit money from retirees. While they lost homes and pensions, he drove luxury cars and threw cocktail parties in Denver. The studio fell silent. Jade glanced over the papers, then looked up. Do you have proof to support these accusations? I do, I said, pulling up my phone and displaying an official email from the legal team representing the victims. Their lawsuit will be filed next week. I'm just the first to speak out. After the segment aired, my phone exploded. Journalists, independent media, even the mayor, who sent a message. This town needs more people like you. As for Ryan, he disappeared from social media within 24 hours. But I knew he wouldn't stay quiet for long. 3 days later, he returned to the site. With my parents in tow. They stood at the entrance holding a sign that read, "We will not be erased from our history." I said nothing. I simply forwarded the legal order to my security team. The document was clear. Ryan Harrow, David Harrow, and Eleanor Harrow were prohibited from coming within 100 feet of the property at 2156 Southridge Hill. Violations would be treated as criminal trespassing, per Colorado State Code 18-4504. They read it in stunned silence. My mother gripped Ryan's arm. My father growled, "You can't do this to the people who raised you?" I responded over the site radio. "Continue work, no one has the authority to pause this project." Ethan stood beside me, quiet. But as the excavators resumed digging the meditation garden foundation, he gave a slow nod. "You chose the right path," he said. "Not revenge. I nodded back. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need them to understand. I just needed them to step back and watch the very thing they mocked rise from the ground. Not a promise. Not a dream. But brick, steel, stone. And will. On the morning of the grand opening, soft sunlight stretched across the stone walkways leading into the retreat grounds. Ridgewell Retreat, the name of the project I had dreamed about for 7 years, now stood gracefully against the hillside with its cedar meditation dome, lavender and mint gardens, and cozy guest rooms with mountain view balconies. We were fully booked for the next 12 months. The waitlist had passed 200. Over 30 local staff had been hired, and 17 small businesses from Colorado Springs had signed on as official partners. It was no longer a scribbled idea in the corner of an old notebook. It was real, alive. I stood on the veranda outside the main hall, where the ribbon cutting would take place, holding a cup of mint tea, surrounded by a calm I never knew I could own. A voice behind me made me turn. "Hi. I'm not sure if you remember me." It took me half a second to recognize her. Grace. My cousin from Fort Collins. Ryan's age. The one who once taped my teenage therapy center sketch on the fridge with the caption, "Center for Abandoned Weirdos." Now she stood in front of me in a simple work dress, lightly made up, her eyes. "So, I heard about this place through an old friend in Denver," Grace said. "You really did it." I didn't respond right away. "I didn't come here to apologize on behalf of the family," she added. "I know that wouldn't mean much. I just wanted to say I admire you. As kids, I didn't understand. I thought you were strange, different. But now, I wish I'd had the guts to protect what I believed in, the way you did." I gave a small nod. "Thank you, not just for coming but for saying that out loud." Grace pulled an envelope from her purse. My mom, Aunt Carol, asked me to bring this. It's a copy of a letter Grandma May wrote before she passed. No one in the family wanted to read it, but I think you should. I read it later, in my small office tucked behind the rose garden. The handwriting was shaky, but the words were unmistakably hers. Grandma May, the one who had always quietly believed in me. In the letter, she wrote that she had seen how unfairly I was treated, how she had fought with my father over dividing the inheritance in my favor, and that if I chose to live truthfully, I would create something the family never believed was possible. Something beautiful, built entirely on self-trust. When I finished reading, I closed the letter. My chest didn't swell with tears or triumph. Just one quiet realization. I no longer needed anyone else to define my worth. At night, after the celebration ended, I sat on the rooftop terrace with Ethan, where we could see the entire center glowing under warm golden lights. He handed me a printout from the finance team. Our first quarter profits had exceeded projections by nearly 40%. I glanced at the numbers, then set the sheet aside. Money isn't what makes me feel successful, I said. What is then? Ethan asked. Legs swinging slightly over the edge, like a kid unwinding after a long day. Knowing that for the first time in my life, I didn't let anyone else tell me who I had to be. He nodded. You don't need anyone's voice, but your own. Anyone who walks through this place can see the vision, the strength, the reason you're standing here. I was quiet for a moment. My family may never see that, I said. But I've seen it in myself. Every day in the mirror. And now, I'm not just living to survive the past. I'm living for the future. Ethan turned to me and smiled. And that future? It's just beginning. Under the moonlight, I watched guests leaving the meditation hall. They moved slowly with bright eyes and relaxed shoulders. A middle-aged woman paused, glancing toward where the old wooden house once stood, now transformed into a lush herb garden. She whispered to the person beside her. I don't know who created this place, but they clearly understand healing. I followed her gaze. I may not have rebuilt that house, but I rebuilt myself. I stepped into the small room beside the meditation hall. The quiet corner, where I often retreated at the end of the day to write in my journal. On the wooden desk sat an old tin box, its lid half closed. Inside were all the letters I had hesitated to throw away. Handwritten notes from my mother, my father, even Ryan. They started writing after the retreat center opened. No real apologies, just excuses dressed up as concern. Things like, how are you holding up? Or, we're still family, nothing changes that. And the veiled warnings. Don't let success make you forget who you are. I had kept every letter, never responding. Maybe part of me waited for them to truly understand. Maybe part of me feared I'd soften. But now, standing in the space I'd built with my own hands, I knew I owed them nothing. I opened the back door to the patio where Ethan and I had built a stone fire pit during the early days of construction. The high plains air still held a nighttime chill, but the sky was littered with stars. I fed the letters into the flame one by one. No rush, no bitterness, just a quiet release. Returning each one to where it belonged, the past. The last envelope was from my mother. No date. Just a single line. No matter what happens, you'll always be my daughter. I stared at the handwriting for a long moment. Then I folded it, placed it on the fire, and watched it turn to ash. When I turned around, Ethan was standing there with 2 steaming mugs of tea. He didn't ask what I was doing. He simply handed me a cup, his gaze steady and kind. All done? He asked softly. I nodded. Yeah. I think that's the last thing I held on to that no longer reflects who I am. He sat beside me. We both watched the embers glow and flicker. Are you nervous about tomorrow? He asked. National launch, press coverage, Influencers showing up? I let out a small laugh. Not really. Because for me, this place opened the day I drew a boundary. Everything since has just been bonus. I tightened my hand around his. His touch was warm and grounded. Not demanding, not possessive. No one had ever held my hand like that before. Gentle, but unwavering. You know, I whispered. There was a time I thought I needed revenge to feel whole. But now I understand. What I really needed was a life where I no longer have to ask for permission to be myself. Ethan nodded, his eyes shining under the soft amber glow of the garden lights. And you've built that life. Not because of them, but in spite of them. I leaned my head on his shoulder. No more storms inside me. The next morning, I put on the white linen dress Grace had sent as a gift. In my hand was a carved wooden sign that read, Ridgewell Retreat, where you return to yourself. I stepped into the meditation garden where the first guests had gathered, eyes wide with wonder and expectation. Ethan held my hand as we walked toward the ribbon. Sabrina stood among the crowd, smiling with tears in her eyes. A few old friends were there too. People who had believed in me before I could believe in myself. As I pulled down the ribbon, I didn't feel like I was opening a business. I felt like I was opening the final gate out of my past. My voice rang clear through the microphone. Thank you all for being here today. Ridgewell Retreat isn't just a place for rest. It's a promise to ourselves. That even if the world has told us we're too soft, too emotional, too much, we still have every right to build a life worthy of who we really are. Applause broke out. I squeezed Ethan's hand a little tighter. Behind me, the ashes of old letters had already mixed into the soil. Ahead of me, the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting light on the freshly laid paths. I smiled. Because for the first time in my life, I knew with absolute certainty. This path is mine. And I'm walking it on my own terms. Violet's story proves that sometimes, true healing means walking away from relationships that wear the label family, but bring nothing but pain. No one has the right to define who you are or manipulate your worth in the name of blood. Freedom doesn't come from revenge, but from the firm decision to reclaim control over your life. In reality, rebuilding yourself is the hardest journey, but also the most worthwhile. What do you think of Violet's choices, and everything she's been through? Would you have done anything differently in her place? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family, truth, and finding your voice.